Thursday, April 15th, we witnessed one of the bloodiest days in our history. A mass shooting that left 6 men dead and a woman and child badly wounded. It seems like the cycle of violence will never end. Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. It's been 1 week since the mass shooting claimed 6 lives and left 2 others in hospital. Since then, police have identified 5 of the 6 victims. Tonight, On the Record, we discuss the cycle of violence with experts in the field of policy, law enforcement, justice, and psychology. Don't go anywhere. Our conversation begins on the other side of this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight we're discussing the cycle of violence. The events of last week played out like the plot of a Hollywood police drama. A hail of bullets, bodies of the victims lie lifeless in the car, and a public uproar at the scene. It was nothing like we would have witnessed in modern times. Shortly after 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 15th, police alerted the media of a double homicide on Jerome Avenue and Chesapeake Road. Reporters met anxious crowds already on the scene.
They make the fellas put them back. They make him put them back.
Jesus! Allow Jesus to intervene! We need God to intervene! Let somebody change!
2 dead soon turned to 5, all gunshot victims. By later that night, the details were made public. It was the kind of news no one was really prepared to hear. A homicide, now categorized as a mass shooting. 6 men dead and a female and toddler hospitalized in a life and death struggle. Amidst it all, left to grieve were the families of the victims.
He was sugar bananas. I'm not going to hear that anymore. I'm not going to see my baby anymore. They take my baby away from me.
I just trying to hold my head above waters and take it as it is. I'll tell you the truth now. It hurt, but that's just me. I can't really carry on like in such a way.
While the nationwide manhunt for the suspects got underway, the political directorate was hard-pressed to give answers to a hurting nation.
We will not sit back and allow our nation to be overrun by a group of misfits. These are the monsters that we would have raised. It's nobody's kids but ours.
The incident raises more questions than we seem equipped to answer. And there appears to be no clear-cut answers. Meanwhile, more lives lost, families shattered, many gripped by fear in what seems to be an endless cycle of violence. Well, joining me now for our first segment of this show is a former Senior Assistant Commissioner of Police, Deputy Commissioner, and recipient of the Queen's Police Medal in 2010. He now serves as the Minister of National Security, the Honourable Marvin Dames. Welcome back to On the Record. Sir, I watched closely that night of the press conference. We heard a little bit of it in that piece just now. In your statement, these are the monsters we would have raised. Nobody's kids but ours. Explain that statement, sir. That hit me that night in watching it, as I'm sure it did so many people. What does that say to where we are as a society?
Well, Jerome, thank you once again for inviting me to your show. Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we tend to forget, whether it's intentionally or just naturally, that many of these persons who are involved in these carnage are our kids. And anytime I get the opportunity to sit in a forum like this, I like to remind everyone that, this just did not occur overnight. What we see taking place around us, albeit as global, because we look around the world and the same things are playing out. But it is decades of neglect and failure on the part of families, of individuals, of communities, and even of the political directorate. And so we find ourselves now in this place. We should not forget that many of the persons that we're talking about are kids. Are kids. These are teenagers, and some in their maybe early 20s for the most part. And so, we're not talking about an experienced group of professionals who have been trained to carry out executions. We're talking about our children, those who still reside within our households throughout our communities, who are committing these types of heinous crimes.
I want to go back to something you said, sir, and I'm going to reference this point here. In the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, there were discussions happening, warnings, in fact, were being given regarding drugs, guns, and gangs. I remember even as a young reporter in the 90s, I asked someone who held your office, he was the minister back then, I wanted a story on gang violence, and he said to me, we don't have a gang violence problem in the Bahamas. But do you believe that the problems that we are experiencing now are a direct result of us ignoring these warning signs 20, 30 decades ago?
Of course, that is certainly a part of it. That is certainly a part of it, without a doubt. But we are now where we are, and the question is that what do we do, and what are we doing, and how many of us have come to the acceptance and the realization that if we're going to get past this point, then it's going to require each and every one of us within our respective places to play our respective roles to get us out of this. And
what's our respective roles, so Minister? When you say play our respective roles, what are our roles as a society in dealing with violence at this level? Because I'm not going to put myself out there in harm's way. So what is my role? What are our roles as a society?
No, and that's right, and that's why I say respective roles. I am not saying that we need to go out there and act as shields to put ourselves in harm's way. But what are our roles as parents, as the church, as the community, as the government, as civil society? what are those rules? And the reality is I mean, you turn on your radio first thing in the morning throughout the course of the day. You go on social media, everyone has an opinion, right? But how many of us are standing up and being counted? We know a lot of these persons throughout our communities. We know who they are. Many of them live with us, whether we want to accept that or not. This is reality. This is the fact, right? And so the thing is here now is, we have become professionals at analyzing and diagnosing the problems. But how many of us are truly accepting, our responsibility and stepping forward now and saying, what do I need to do to ensure that, I can create a better future for those to come? Because remember, we're talking about the guys now who are out there pulling the triggers. But there are many young persons who are in school, in primary school, in junior high school, and who are out there in those communities who are very impressionable,
And that's a pointer to the cycle of violence, which is the point of the show today.
And so how do we break that cycle? You see, there may be some now at a place of no return, right? But there are, my primary concern will be those who are most vulnerable, and they're in the majority. And so we are all competing, right, to ensure, right, that we do not allow that category of persons to spiral into this cycle of continued violence.
Okay, we got to move on to another point. And this next question really has to do with the blame game, I call it. Just this week, you told reporters you were disturbed by social media reports naming police officers who the public says are responsible for the murders of these men, and cautioned the public against spreading unsustainable claims. What is the danger in this and other things that we see being propagated on social media?
Yeah, this is very reckless, and what it does really, without any facts, right? It places these officers and other officers in harm's way, and their families. We are living in an era of social media. So social media rules the day now. The problem with that is that we have to decide, how do we want to use social media? Do we want to use it as a medium, as an avenue to communicate productive lessons so that we all can learn? Or do we want to use it as a means to spread fake news, to spread lies, to put people's lives at risk? Because, once you put something out there, it's very
back, yeah. So let's jump again to the issue of guns. I mean, we would have heard at the news conference, the weapons used inflicted the most amount of possible damage you could, on these victims. This is not a new issue. We have to know where the guns are coming in, and we have to know the supply chain. I can't accept that police don't know. So what are we doing to address that? You, as I said in the beginning, of our former decorated police officer, what are we doing to address this issue? These guns continue to flow into the Bahamas. We don't make guns.
No, you're absolutely correct. It's interesting because yesterday I was asked to co-chair a panel for Caribbean ministers of national security. So this has been this whole question around the trafficking of illicit firearms is a global problem. It's a problem that rests certainly within the United Nations and throughout. It's a regional problem as well, as we could see from the events of last week. But over the last the many decades, that the use of firearms in violent offenses and homicides and armed robberies in many of our nation, on average, it spans over 80%. So in homicide,
again, to the crux of the question, sir, how are we
yeah,
addressing the inflow of these guns? And we have to know where they're coming from.
yeah, I want to come to that. And if you look at the seizure records from law enforcement over, certainly in recent times, since we have come into office, especially, that the seizures continue to grow significantly, and so the intelligence is working. The partnerships with regional partners, especially our partner to the north in the United States of America, where the vast majority of these weapons that we're finding on our streets are originating from, and throughout the Caribbean. So that is happening. Jerome, the problem we face is not so much, you see, the question ought to be what is fueling the demand? Because as long as you have a demand, you're going to have someone who will service that demand. And drug trafficking is a perfect example. We have been fighting drug trafficking for decades, before you and I were born, and it continues. And we have, throughout our region, when we speak about OPBAT, where this partnership with the Bahamas, the U.S., Turks and Caicos, and the U.K. On behalf of Turks and Caicos, it's a model agreement. But despite the resources and the successes of OPBAT, we still continue to fight the scourge of illicit drug.
Right, final question, sir. As the Minister of National Security, what moves are you or government making from a policy perspective, or are there moves, any additional moves you're going to make to address this problem? I'm talking about guns in particular and this violent crime issue.
Yeah, so coming into office, we said that we would take a multi-agency, multifaceted approach to this problem, and we are doing just that. Under, for example, the Citizen Security and Justice Program, we continue to work and establish strategies throughout the communities of this country that are paying significant dividends. Under the NNWC, National Neighborhood Watch Council, we're bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community. And as you know, the NNWC is a model program throughout the world. We just accepted the leader in community policing global award, the Bahamas did. And so that's working very well with Dr. Allen and his team and the crime committee, which is a group of persons, government and non-government and civil society, that we've been working and doing studies and looking at ways to mitigate conflicts throughout our communities. And so we have multi-agency as well, groupings that continue to look at these problems. And so there is a lot going on. But I hasten to say that these are not short-term fix. We did not just get here last week. It has taken us decades to get to this point. And so one will accept, however, that it will take a while to move away from this. We've been looking at entrepreneurship. We've been looking at building skills throughout the government, throughout labor, and education, and everything else. I mean, our statistics will continue to reflect.
Yeah,
that's
Minister,
a positive.
We're out of time. I do apologize, but thank you for coming on and sharing this with us. Most poignant, and I want people to take this away. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight. And it's an ongoing issue. And I'm sure it's something that keeps a lot of us awake up at night. And so we wish you all the best. I know it's a tough job, but thank you very much for coming on and speaking with us today. Next time, we'll give you a little bit more time. We'll talk a little bit more.
Thank you, Jerome. Always a pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you,
sir.
so very much. Don't go away to our audience. When we come back, we dive deeper into law enforcement with the head of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. We're back right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. And welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight we're discussing the cycle of violence. Normally, police speak to the media on the crime scene, but on Thursday, reporters were summoned to police headquarters hours later for a news conference. Commissioner of Police Paul Roll would lead that news conference, attempting to provide some answers that night. He is here tonight to try and give us even more answers to the more questions a week later. Welcome, Commissioner. Good to have you back on the record.
Okay, good evening, Jerome, and it's good to be here.
Sir, let's start out by talking about where we are in the investigations a week later. What can you tell us a week after this mass shooting?
Jerome, what I can tell you is the investigation is in high gear. We're following some significant leads in regards to the whole process as to what happened. I think we have a better understanding now of what actually transpired and the ambush that we saw on Thursday. And so the investigators are even at this moment right now meeting with the family, and they're updating them as to progress and exactly what we know took place. As you will recall, persons were driving in a white Honda Inspire when they were intercepted at Jerome Avenue by 4 persons who ambushed them and execution style killed all those persons in that vehicle. We are able to say that at least 2 vehicles we have identified that may have been involved, that followed this vehicle with the victims and executed them.
You said you learned about the ambush. Is there anything new that you can tell us about that actual ambush?
There are some information, John, that we are working with, and we, as far as those persons that are involved, some of it I do not want to discuss openly in the media as yet until we do some things further. And so with regards to that part of it, no, I don't want to say, other than to say that I believe that we are making some good progress.
On the surface of this, sir, this appears to be some type of retaliation. Are you able to, at this point, say that you know the source of that retaliation, or where and how this would have all started?
I don't want to say retaliation. We are investigating all avenues in regards to what took place, to try and establish who may have been the intended target. So it is possible. We have not ruled out retaliation. When you said retaliation, then retaliation for what? Okay. We have been receiving information, making all of those information to try and determine, first of all, we don't know why these persons did what they did. So I don't want to say, quite frankly, yet retaliation, but no.
What, sir, if you can, or can you tell us again, what were the circumstances of their initial arrest? We know that these men were taken into custody. And why were they released and not charged if they were taken into custody?
An individual, I think if you were following Jerome, the following day, some persons appeared in court charged for the firearm. Their arrest came about, the individuals were at some function on Paradise Island when a call came into police control room about persons having firearms at this place. Officers went to that establishment and persons began scrambling. They ran. And the police officers had set up a checkpoint at the bridge. And individuals came over and were intercepted. When they were searched, a firearm, I believe it was a .45 pistol, was found in the vehicle. Nobody owned up to it. All of those persons were arrested and were taken into custody. And the investigations on that point continued on. And a decision was made, I think, after one of the individuals admitted that the firearm was his. Then he was charged, the others were released, and that's why they were not charged. The decision was made by the investigators then that once they had an idea who owned the weapon, there was no need to charge everybody.
So there have been allegations, which I know that you have spoken to, that these individuals were set up. And I want to speak to what is out there in the public space, that somehow police were involved. Are you investigating that charge? Can you speak to that at this point?
Yeah, we are investigating, Jerome, and let me say, our investigation right now does not show any police officers involved, but I can assure you and I can assure members of the public and indeed the family that if, in fact, we find that a police officer or any police officer is involved, they will suffer the consequences as anybody else, and they will have to answer to it. We're not going to try and cover. I'm trying to find out who is responsible, and whoever we find to be responsible will have to answer for the heinous act, for whatever their role or involvement may be.
Did these men have a history with police? Oftentimes we'll hear a common phrase coming from the police, these individuals were known to the police. Were these men known to the police? Did they have a history with the police? The victims I'm speaking of now.
Jerome, if you've been following me in my days at CID, I don't particularly ride on whether or not an individual had a history with the police. That has nothing to do with the fact that these persons were murdered. We're talking about lives that were lost. We have to deal with the family. And there's the perception, and I think the media has to also be sensitized with it. And persons tend to get an attitude that, police feel like the person was, has a history with the police, so they're not going to investigate. I stay away from analyzing that in the public domain, because whether the individual that is murdered has a history with the police or not, that individual is a father, a brother, a son, and someone loves him. So I cannot take into account that, there may be a role to play in whether or not that might have contributed to an individual's murder, but we have to investigate all. I just don't like the idea of discussing that like that in the public domain, if you follow what I'm saying.
I certainly follow, sir, and I brought it up because oftentimes we at the public would jump to the conclusion that if this individual was involved in some type of illegal or illicit activity prior to this, that this was somehow the result of the activities that they were involved in. And that's why I brought it up, because sometimes the public will draw that conclusion, and to borrow that phrase, you live by the sword, you know the rest.
Yeah, that might be so. We take those into account in trying to determine who is responsible. And so, but if somebody has a criminal history that they have done something in the past, we also have a process of rehabilitation. And so if a person has paid their dues for a crime that they committed, you can't keep punishing them. And, I have made the comment on more than one occasion, sometimes we continue to victimize and re-victimize the person, you re-victimize the families when sometimes in doing it. And I think we all have just be, kind of sensitized with it. But that we take those things into account, certainly in trying to establish what happened, particularly when you don't know. I just don't like the idea of speaking about that in the public domain, that's all.
No problem, sir. Well understood. The night of the shooting, immediately following at the news conference, you announced that police would be out in full force, not only investigating, but trying to keep the peace and the law and order. Are you concerned, or are you still on that heightened alert in the event that there is an attempt of some type of retaliation or a continuation of this?
Yeah, we are going to remain on high alert. We have been in all of those areas, and we will continue that, because remember, we have not yet captured those persons that are responsible, and we're not going to stop. And I want to assure you and members of the public that we are working assiduously to identify the persons that are responsible for this so we can bring them to justice. So those, the level of policing presence, yeah, that is still going on, and we want to make sure that nobody wants to engage in retaliation, and that is right at this very minute now we are meeting with the family to bring the family up to date as to what we know. That I'm going to leave and join them in a few minutes.
So this crime, like so many others, is rooted in a larger problem with the proliferation of firearms on our streets, even high-powered firearms. If you can, sir, speak to what the police may be doing specifically to try and arrest this problem. As I raised in a previous segment, we don't manufacture guns in the Bahamas, but yet they are readily available. Is there a strategy now to try and arrest this problem when we have high-powered weapons that can inflict maximum damage in a relatively short period of time?
Yeah, we, Jerome, are working with our partners in different countries, particularly with the ATF and HSI, Homeland Security Investigators, and the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, as well as the Custom and Border Protection in the United States. We have been working jointly to try and identify those, the origin of these firearms, and they are helping us on that side. Whenever we were able to recover a firearm, we do the history on it, we go back to try and determine who purchased that, and then how it got here into the Bahamas. And, we have done quite a bit because, up until recently, we did not have any of those persons attached to the embassy here in the Bahamas, and it shows that the level of involvement, and even with the U.S. Department of State in providing attaché and investigators from HSI and the ATF. They are now on ground in country, and they work with us in order to try and stem the flow. There are also some things that they're doing on that side to help mitigate and identify firearms as persons attempt to bring them into the country.
Commissioner, thank you very much. I think one thing that this experience will remind us of, and it's one that we learned even at the height of the drug trade, we cannot arrest this problem alone. We cannot tackle it alone. And I'm happy to hear from you and even my previous guests that we are reaching out to our neighbors and international partners to try and do something about this And so, sir, we thank you very much. We wish you and your officers all the best. We know it's a tough job. Keep up the good work. Thank you so very much. When we come back, if and when these gunmen are captured, what potential punishment awaits them? Stay with us. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. And welcome back to On the Record. Thank you so much for watching. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and tonight we're talking about the cycle of violence we seem to find ourselves in. The 2010 National Population Census showed that young people under 35 comprised 58% of the total population of the Bahamas. My guest for this segment of the show is no stranger to working with young people. He is an attorney who focuses on juvenile justice. He's the executive director of Project Youth Justice and former chairman of the Bahamas National Youth Policy Team. Welcome to On the Record, Tavari Smith. As someone who has worked with youth development over the years, let's dive right in. What seems to be the problem? How is it that we've gotten to this point?
That's a very loaded question, and a lot of this has to do with policy. It has to do with communities, it has to do with our home environment, and we've lost a lot of the foundation of what it was to be a Bahamian society. And so when you find this breakdown happening in our communities and our society, that starts to spill out, and it spills out through violence. There's an old African proverb that says, when you ignore a young person or when you ignore a child, he will burn down the village to feel the warmth. And that's pretty much what I believe is going on right now with our young people. Our young people are acting out in a way because they've been rejected by society. They're not being included in the decision-making process, and our policies are not geared towards including them at all levels. And so this is what we are dealing with right now as a nation. We're grappling with this issue of crime.
What fate now awaits those who would have perpetrated this crime? As police continue to look for those involved, what fate awaits them once they are, if and when they're in the hands of police?
Well, they have to go through the process. The police will do their due diligence and conduct their investigations, and depending on what the results of those investigations are, they will determine whether to lay charges, what those charges are, and then they will be brought before the court. That in itself is an entire process that we have to go through. The court itself, a trial will have to be conducted, and the jury will render its verdict on what happens to those who are responsible for these heinous acts that we've seen committed on our society.
A lot of these young men who are involved in crimes don't just wake up one morning and decide to commit crime. It begins when they are juveniles. Do we see that
That's
pattern
correct.
of behavior? I mean, once they find themselves before the juvenile panel, do we see that now play out as they get into adulthood?
That's a very good question, and we do see this pattern. Several years ago, the Vann College of the Bahamas, now University of the Bahamas, conducted a prison inmate study. I was a part of that research team where we went into the Van Foxhill prison, now Bahamas Department of Correction, and we spoke with a number of the inmates there, as many of them as possible. One of the questions that we would have put to the inmate was what was your first interaction with the criminal justice system? And what we found was an alarming majority of those persons who are now in Her Majesty's prison, or BDOX as they call it, their first interaction with the criminal justice system was as a juvenile. And that is one of the reasons why I'm such a strong advocate for juvenile justice reform in the Bahamas, because if we put our resources, our policy attention, our focus, and our intervention to reforming our juvenile justice system, allowing diversions for our young people who come in conflict with the law at the earliest possible opportunity, then we do not find this repeat offending that young people seem to find themselves in, this cycle of crime and violence that our young people are dealing with. We're missing an opportunity to bend the tree while it's young, as the proverbial proverb would say.
What are those missed opportunities? I mean, I asked the question, is incarceration and punishment, is that the answer? But it seems you're advocating for something else.
Well, when we think of incarceration for young people under the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child should always be a last resort. And so we shouldn't automatically rush to incarceration. We should rush to reform. How do we get this young person reformed? How do we make them whole? How do we engage them in society? How do we make them a productive member of what it means to be Bahamian, to be in this community? Some of the things that I'm advocating for is community-based interventions. Get these young people back into the community. A lot of the crimes, so to speak, that young people find themselves committing at an early age when they come before the juvenile panel started as very trivial offenses. Simple things like trespass, things that we call status offenses, breaking curfew, small petty theft and things of that sort. But if we do not put the interventions in place early enough to deal with those smaller offenses, they become bigger crimes. And so what we now see happening before the juvenile panel is young people are being charged with possession of firearm. Young people are being charged with aggravated assault. Young people are being charged with any number of serious crimes that we did not find them being charged with before. And these are alarming rates that are continuing to go up.
Have we been able to identify what is the root cause of the escalation and the seriousness of these crimes in our juveniles? You pointed out that this is, new in many cases. You're seeing the seriousness of the crimes before the juvenile panel. Is it because the communities are becoming more violent? Are they being exposed to this at a younger age? Are they being influenced? Are you able to identify the root causes, or at least some of the causes at this point?
That's a loaded question. And the reason why I say that is because one of the problems we have is, as a society, as a nation, particularly as our judicial system, is we don't do research. And when we do research, that information isn't readily available to the public. What we do at Project Youth Justice, which works in conjunction with the firm that I'm a part of, Boswick and Boswick, one of the things that we do is we provide mental health screening for a lot of our young people that we represent, because we want to know their background. We want to know the social impacts. We want to know what family structures that they come from, so that we can start to form some informed analysis of what's going on. Are these single parent homes? Are these hotspot communities? Are these young people who dropped out of school at a particular age? Are these young people who were victims of bullying? And so we have some data, but this is recent data, and we've not been collecting data as a nation for a very long time. So to identify all of those factors, people will pretty much be guessing based on our limited interaction with these young people when they do come before the courts.
Very good point. Do you, or have you in your work, or even, in dealing with these young people and these instances, have you identified a lack of opportunity anywhere in there? Because a lot of times, as the show suggests, it's a cycle. The parents don't have the opportunities, the kids don't have the opportunities, they become the environment.
Right.
Are we lacking opportunities for our young people, particularly our young men?
Opportunities, but we're also lacking resources. We don't put forward the correct amount of resources that we need to address crime. One of the things that the UN started to really put out there and promote is that we need to deal with crime as a public health initiative. And if we start to address crime from a public health standpoint, then we would see the kind of resources going into crime to really combat crime. We always address crime from the police, we address crime from the courts, but where are the social interventions early on to prevent crime at an early age? And in also providing opportunities, we have to provide resources for those parents. I cannot tell you the amount of parents that have called me and said, Mr. Smith, my son is on a path that's going to lead to destruction. I need help, and I need help
So
now.
parents are
I don't know where to
identifying
go.
these issues. The parents are seeing these issues.
They're aware. They're absolutely aware. The parents are absolutely aware. The parents are concerned. The parents know what's going on in their home, but they have limited persons that they can talk to. They turn to the church. A lot of our churches aren't functioning up to that level to really provide the kind of professional help that our young people need. It goes beyond counseling. If you're talking about providing counseling, you have to do the mental health screening in the beginning to know what areas that you're counseling these children on.
Tavari, this is going to be our last question, but if you are a parent, if you are a grandparent, a godparent, an uncle, an aunt, and you identify a juvenile who, as you said, is on the wrong path, you see this about to unfold, you started to speak to it, what do you do? What resources are available? What can you do to stop that cycle or to reach out and help that young person?
You call out for help. That's what you do. And you reach out to anybody that you can reach out to. Our guidance counselors are available in the school. I've had guidance counselors call me on behalf of their young people. You can reach us at Project Youth Justice. You can reach out to the Department of Social Services. There are many, many community activists out there who are also providing sports programs, community programs, after school programs. You reach out for help. And as a parent, you don't give up. You continue to knock on that door and you get the help that you need for your child.
Okay, they are telling me I get one more question in this segment.
Go ahead.
We've talked about what's going wrong. What's going right? I always like to leave people with a little bit of optimism and hope. What's going right out there?
What's going right is I would like to give some credit to our new Chief Justice because he has identified the fact that our juvenile court is not functioning to its optimum level. And so he has put together a team that's looking at how do we reform the juvenile court, how do we start to make some changes to provide diversion programs for these young people. I know the Department of Social Services has a number of initiatives going on. So there are discussions happening around the table. There's a body of law that's being developed in this area that we didn't consider before. Our judges are cognizant of the issues that children are coming before the courts younger and younger than we've ever seen before. So the fact that we've identified the problem, that's key. That's going right. Now that we know the problem, we can address it.
Sir, I do want to thank you for taking this opportunity to speak with us. I cannot imagine how difficult your work must be at times, dealing with young people and their problems. So Tavari Smith, thank you very much for the work that you're doing. We appreciate it. Keep up the good work. All hope is not lost. I do want to leave people with that sense. And we're going to keep pushing. So thank you so very much. We appreciate you spending time with us in this segment. And coming up, folks, we look at the psychological effects of an incident of this magnitude. You're watching On the Record. Stay with us. We're back right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. This is our final segment in the show tonight. We're examining last week's mass shooting, our topic, the cycle of violence. My guest is the University of the Bahamas' consultant on mental health and is the managing director of Holistic Health Services Limited, Dr. Timothy Barrett, no stranger to us here on the record. Sir, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Barrett, what are the psychological effects of an event like last Thursday? I want to talk first about the effects on the families of the victims, because they are the ones who are really, I think, feeling the brunt of all of this right now.
Well, there are many potential effects. Some of them may end up eventually with a good result, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Children Against Drunk Driving, that sort of thing. But initially, what you have is sadness and loss and anger and confusion. And that may lead to thoughts of revenge and vindication. The persons who were around, who were nearby, have the biggest risk of developing acute stress disorder and eventually post-traumatic stress disorder. And even if families weren't there at the time, when they hear about a description of the events, they could eventually end up developing acute stress disorder. So, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Lots of grief may even lead to depression. People who are predisposed to anxiety. Their mental health has been severely traumatized and affected, generally speaking.
And do
Yes.
we generally recognize those kinds of things? I mean, you're talking about it and it seems very logical, but for us, we just think of the loss and the grief. But is enough attention given to the mental state of the survivors, whether it be family members, whether it be people who are on the scene who witnessed the, may have witnessed the aftermath? Do we give enough attention to those things?
No, unfortunately. And no matter how much we preach, no matter how much we suggest, try to encourage a focus on mental health, it seems to get lost in the shuffle. We're going through budget cuts now in relation to the upcoming budget. And the first thing that's going to go is anything that's related to someone's mental health. Simply because we associate those two words, mental health, with mental illness.
So is it time?
Unfortunately, we don't know.
In our last segment, our guest alluded to the fact that we need to, and international organizations have even said that we need to start categorizing crime and the situation with crime as a public health issue. Do you advocate for something like that as well? And what do you think something like that would do to help?
Well, if it is a public health issue and it has the right priority, then we're going to be looking at the public's health. And that's going to include body, soul, and spirit. I have long tried to advocate for an educational program to be in people's face all the time, helping them to understand what it is that happens when you have emotional reactions, helping them to understand how to manage distressing situations, even grief, to teach people about what the importance is of grieving and going through. And what that's going to do if we have an organized program that addresses the information that we need to give to the public. And if we send those messages out using every form of media that we have consistently, then we're doing our role in informing the public about good health, how they can get it, and how they can maintain it. But the focus has to be first and foremost on one's mental health. I mean, this is Mental Health Month. Without mental health, there is no health.
Very, very, very good point. I want to speak to though this trend to violence and how we seem to defer to violence as the go-to nowadays. There is almost no conflict resolution. And everything, in every instance, the response is violence. Sometimes just even in how we address each other and the aggressiveness of the tones and the conversations. I mean, the moment something begins to go off the rails, we resort to verbal attacks and hostility. You know, what is at the basis of all of this? When did we become such a violent and hostile people?
And you know, it's at every level. It's in the church, it's in government circles, it's at every level. No, we can't sit around and point a finger of blame at one segment of the community, because that means we're not part of the problem. That means we can't be part of the solution. When children are growing up and they're exposed to a violent atmosphere, when they see violence that goes unpunished, when it seems as though if you're not the violent one, you're going to be the victim. When we see and hear about these things that occur, and we play video games and we watch TV and we cheer when the fella gets shot, all of this is giving us a programming that says it's okay to be violent. Now, let's talk about conflict for a while. Conflict is not understood. And we need to be teaching this from primary and maybe even before primary school. Conflict is the norm. We're different, every one of us. Every one of us is going to have a different opinion about what it is that happened over the recent days. Everyone. We might be talking and agreeing with each other, but we're not saying the same thing. And when we don't learn to manage ourselves in the conflict, then the conflict gets out of control.
I've got to ask this as well, because there was a lot of hostility towards the police, and we spoke to the commissioner earlier on, but what role now does the police play? And by that I mean many times, the police are accused of being aggressive, heavy-handed, going beyond, what they should do, going beyond just regular police tactics. Is there a role for the police to play? And sometimes in my own experience, I raise an eyebrow when I see the police's reaction, and I think to myself, no, is that really warranted? And then you see a clash where, you would have seen the crowds angry at the police who represent law enforcement, who represent the law, and the public is angry at the police.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the police, let's admit it, they have a tough job. It's a thankless job and it's a tough job. But within the context of what needs to happen in terms of their training to manage the realities of the day, the time that they spend in training doesn't allow them to develop that knowledge and those skills. I would strongly suggest, because, in Denmark and in Finland and in Norway and Sweden and those countries there, you got to go into a program for 3 years and graduate before you become a police officer. Now, I'm not saying that we imitate and duplicate that here, but once they have finished their basic training, then continued training with a program for a period of at least 2 years needs to be instituted, and helping them to become socially intelligent and emotionally intelligent to deal with the issues they inevitably will face.
Dr. Bart, take us now into the mind of that young man who picks up that gun and sets out to commit not just one, but a series of murders. What is in his mind in that moment when he sets out to inflict that kind of harm?
Unfortunately, I can't say what's in his mind, but what we know from studies is that this is not a reaction right away to something. This is something that has been planned, and he is envisioning what it is that he's going to do, and his mind is reinforcing that in a positive way. Somehow or the other, over the years, he has developed a reward system that's associated with inflicting harm to the degree of death. And that's the dynamic in relation to what's going on in people's head, who carefully, not you hit me and I hit you back. Okay, fine. We understand that that's a reaction. But this is when you go away and carefully, cold-heartedly, intentionally plan to inflict harm.
I asked this question of my previous guest, and I'm going to ask you just from a mental health and a psychiatric perspective. When you notice a trend in your child or somebody that you're raising, whether it's a juvenile or whatever, when you notice a trend and you have that concern that this is not going to end well, and you see that path, what do you do? What is available? What resources are available out there for you to reach out for help when you realize that you can no longer reach or help this young man or young woman?
Well, we can start in the schools, and we can bring it to the attention of the guidance counselors, and we can have discussions with the guidance counselors and the teachers about what it is that we're concerned about, and see whether or not they have any intervention or they take up the challenge of dealing with the behaviors that present. If the guidance counselors and teachers feel that this is not something that they can handle by themselves, then there should be some agency, some expert that you can refer to. And of course, we have child and adolescent services here in the Bahamas, but they can only do so much. There are private agencies that you can access, psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, to provide those services. In fact, I provide from my company, provide services for schools in relation to just that. And it's worked very, very well.
So the message here, and we're wrapping up, I want to thank you, but so the message here is seek help, don't give up. If one door closes, if you can't get anywhere, keep going, keep pressing, but try to get help, reach out. Intervention is the key, eh?
Intervention is the key.
Okay, sir, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it. You always give us great information when you come on the show. Great, wise counsel. This is a big problem that we're going to be addressing for a while, but at least we know from this conversation and others that there is help and there are things people can do to begin to break this cycle of violence. Thank you so very much. That's also going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record, The Cycle of Violence. A very special thank you to all of my guests. We appreciate the time you took to be with us today. On behalf of my technical and production staff here at On the Record, we thank you, our guests, for staying tuned with us each week. We look forward to seeing you again next week, same time, same place, right here on The Record.